Hi, Supercharger. So it's time for us to actually go inside Figma or a design tool of your choice and build a color palette. So to do that, I'm gonna have two different prompts. One of them, the one that we're gonna start with right now, is let's think of like maybe a cryptocurrency brand or something very futuristic. And they already have their two main brand colors chosen. It's this purple one and this kind of hot pink, neon pink one. So you can definitely see a lot of brands that are using maybe similar colors inside of their branding. So let's say how we can use these two like really glaring saturated neon colors and create a color palette for UI design out of them. So one thing that we do need to figure out is which one feels a little bit better to be our primary color and which one is going to be our accent color. Even if we look at this image that was kind of the reference point for me where I tried to kind of pick the shades from, I envisioned it as their like maybe main image that they're going to have somewhere in the header of the website or something. So I kind of took it as a reference point. And usually if you're working with a brand that already has a couple of these things decided, maybe they have an existing product, be it a website, mobile app, web app, whatever it is, you can analyze what they have and see how you can use that as a starting point. I'm going to do a different approach for the second prompt project that we're going to do. So knowing that not always are you going to have these branding assets already prepared for you. So with this example, we do have that, and that's a benefit, and that's kind of the most common scenario. Like they're going to approach with you, they're going to approach you with already, even if they don't have a brand guide ready, they might have like a sense of color direction that they want to take. So we have our primary color in here and our accent color in here. A good thing for both of these colors, like even without tweaking, I feel like they might actually work. So I'm gonna take those two first and just slide it to the side a bit. I'm a little bit of a freak when it comes to like making sure that everything's divisible by 8. So I hope that like parts, even though it's really helpful when you're working in UI design and you're keeping things neat and organized and they're like everything can be divided by 8, that's a really good plus, or like 4, whatever your base number is. You can really go overboard with it, so I hope I don't kind of translate that to you as well, and the OCD part of doing that. Okay, so we're starting off with this. In most UI cases for colors like the primary one and the accent one, you're gonna need at least a couple of shades. And let's think about which ones those could be. So really light ones for maybe like backgrounds and maybe like some strokes connected to really light backgrounds or dividers inside of them. You're gonna need the main mid one, which is gonna be used for most parts. Like if this is going to be used on a button, it's probably going to be this shade. You might need like a slightly darker or lighter one for your hover states, or maybe like if it's an icon next to something, that's usually a good thing to keep in mind in the beginning of the project. And then also you're going to need like at least 1 or 2 shades of the darker ones for like what happens if you're using this as a text or something. So those are usually the number of shades that I would plan for. So like 4 to 6 to 7 or 8, or even like up to 10 is usually enough. Now, what I've seen a lot of beginners struggle with is you're going to see a recommendation of like, oh, you need like 10 shades always, or like some of the pre-made color palettes that are made specifically for UI design might have more than needed. And that's going to happen even with the bonuses that we offer with this course, where you're going to have some color palettes ready for you to use until you actually master creating them yourself. But if you're not using a particular shade of that color, remove it. Like it's usually better to keep it low until the need for an additional shade appears, than to start with 10 and then like have only 3 that you're actually using, and all of these 7 ones are just like standing there for whatever reason. Especially if you're delivering that project to a developer who then needs to start developing things, or like a team of developers, they might think that all of those shades are going to be used somewhere in the project, and they're going to spend time like building all of those things up without you ever actually using them. So if you create a color palette and you have like 6 shades and end up using only 4, remove the other 2, or like save them somewhere as a reference for later. But like if they're not actually used in the project, there's no need for them to appear anywhere in the guide. And a lot of designers and content creators who are working in the design industry are actually like pushing wrong advice with that. So it's just something that I wanted to kind of let everyone know who's working there, who's working on their color palettes. Like, you don't have to create 10 shades. Like, even if an online generator for you creates 20 different shades of color, you can like pick and choose like the 5 or 6 that seem most likely choices for you that you're actually going to be using in your project. And then from then, like if you're not using them on the first 10 screens that you've designed, just kind of remove all of the shades that you didn't use. Okay, now that we have that out of the way and we actually are prepared to start creating some of our shades, let's start with our primary palette. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate this to like 5. So let's create like 2 lighter shades and 2 darker shades. I'm going to see this one as the shade that's going to be darker because it's going to be like a hover effect or something. So one thing that I usually do with very saturated colors like this, especially if they're branded ones and not neutral ones, I'm going to follow a line like this. So it's always going to keep saturation at a higher part. One thing that you can do for like further control is maybe just like use the input fields in here to do that, if you're not still feeling comfortable with just like eyeballing it in a sense and trying to get it to a point where it's going to work. So I think I'm going to just move it slightly down so that it becomes darker. Think about brightness up, down. And I am going to make it a little bit more saturated because saturated always feels darker. And also, as you're moving darker to darker and darker shades, saturation is slowly getting lost. So that's why usually you would kind of maybe pick it somewhere in here. And I'm going to, again, eyeball it to something that feels okay. Like these two feel similar, but it might be enough, especially if I'm just hovering over an item, to still recognize it as a variation of this color. And then for this one, I'm really going to go down here into some of the darker shades. I don't want it to feel too like purple, but I also want it to be noticeably tinted with a shade of this purple that we're using. So I feel like this is going to be good enough for some of those areas where we might want to have a little bit of a tinted text. It's really important to still kind of make it visible, especially if it's going to be used on text or something. So you don't want to go into area like this, because that's most likely just going to be confused with your darkest neutral shades anyway. For the lighter tones, I'm gonna go into this area. And now one thing that I do notice is like a lot of these parts are rarely gonna be used in your UI projects because they're gonna be like saturated, but still not dark enough to work in a lot of other areas. So as I said, like with lighter tones, I'm usually gonna look for a really light shade that I'm gonna use for a background, and then another one pretty close to it but a little bit darker for some of the separators or like dividers that we're going to have in our design. So I'm actually going to start off with this one, and I'm going to go in here. Usually the saturation and brightness is something that you would look at. So like with some of these lighter shades, when you're like 95 and plus in brightness, like up to 3 or 4 is usually enough. You can go a little bit higher if you want it to feel like there's more of that color. And then one other thing that you can do to create a second shade is to actually kind of duplicate this one. I just copied the color style from this layer to this one by using Command Option C, pasting it by Command Option V, and then I'm gonna duplicate this layer and just set it to like 10% or something. Go in here and color pick this one, and it's gonna be a more tinted version of this. Now 10% seemed to be good enough, but it's actually too much for my liking. So I'm gonna go somewhere around 4 or 5. You can change the opacity by hitting like 0, 4, 0, 5 to actually get to the actual number. If you just hit 5, it's gonna be 50%. So if you wanna get to like 22% of opacity, you just have to quickly hit 2 and 2 on your keyboard, and that's gonna be 22. So like this. You can see first hit made it 20, the second quick hit made it 22. So like 20, or if I do, it's 22. So do the same thing for like 5, 0, 5. So that might work better. Let's color pick it and see. Again, it might be a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna go in here and manually decrease the saturation to something less noticeable like this, and maybe a darker, so I can still remove a little bit of saturation. Yeah, somewhere around here. So, and that's just something that I've noticed from experience. Like I rarely use shades that, if you think of a color palette from going from like a weighted color palette that has those numbers going from like 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, and so on in the naming convention that you use, I would rarely use like 300 or 400 in the project. I rarely see a use case for those items. In some of the bigger projects, yes, they're useful and they are used, but in most projects, especially in the beginning, it's better to start off with something like 5 or 6 shades and then just like introduce a new one if it's needed. So if I'm ever going to need a shade in between these two, and it doesn't have to be like really in the middle of it, it can be really close to this one, but it's going lighter, I would just create the variation with the same logic that I did in here. So one version would be just like color pick this and maybe slightly move it to the lighter areas like this, or it could be using this and then duplicating this shade over it and maybe just like setting the opacity to some number like 50. If it's somewhere in the middle, if it's really closer to that one, I would use maybe like 80 or 70. Or if it's really closer to the lighter tones, I would use something like 10, 20, 5%, whatever works or seems to work. And that's how I would create the shade in between the two. Okay, so that's one thing that we need to do. The other thing that we need to do is repeat the process for this hot pink color. So I'm just gonna duplicate these two, duplicate these, drag them in here. Again, probably this is going to be used for like backgrounds and elements like that, and maybe these ones are going to be used for accents, so areas that are really going to be maybe interactive or clickable, or we just want to draw attention to them. So again, a similar thing, I do expect probably the same amount of shades to be needed. I'm going to create a darker one in here. I'm trying to make the differences feel the same. Again, not an exact science, but like overall, if I go in here and this is like 83.85, in here it would be 93.75. So it went down, the saturation went up by 10 and brightness went down by 10. Yeah. So in here you could probably do the same thing. 67 will become 77, and this is going to become like 90. So 77, and this one is like 93. So even with eyeballing it, just making it feel the same, like I already got close to a truly mathematical replica of what I did on the top anyway. And sometimes I don't want it to be like the exact same math used, because it's not going to work the same on different hues. Like if I had a yellow in here, just lowering the brightness by 10 is going to make it look really different than the original brightness and any kind of color that we used. So it's going to feel off, even though mathematically it's correct. A lot of things in design don't have to necessarily do that. It's more about like optically, does it feel correct? If it does, you did a good job. Perfect. And again, like if this is going to be your first time doing that, I know that it might be a little bit discouraging that there's not like a strict formula for it, but hopefully through the demo that we're going to do in this video, you're going to see a couple of concepts to keep in mind. If you're replicating it as you're watching along, even better. It's going to become like a muscle memory to you with time. And then with the assignments that you're going to have after this video as well, hopefully all of that practice and like doing it and repeating it is actually going to make you notice different subtleties that happen when you're working with neon tones like this one, or maybe pastel ones, or like anything else in between. There are some different things that are going to happen that are going to be caused by the context of the project that you're working on and the colors that were there from the beginning, or maybe that you decided to pick. But overall, like the strategies and the goals for all of it, even if those change, you can still kind of follow along and try to get to the better points of it. So yeah, in here, you can see that these feel like they're going to work really well together. I'm just going to notice what I did in here. So like 497, and just see if it works. 497. It does feel like a little bit lighter, and that's most likely. So what we have in here is like 250. So probably one of the darkest areas of luminosity that we can go to. And in here we have 290, which is getting closer to 300, which would probably be like a local peak of perceived brightness. So with that one, we do want to maybe make it just like 1 or 2 shades darker. I think 1 is going to be enough. And then for saturation, I'm going to keep it at 4. But maybe when trying it out, I would see if it still works and feels the same. And then what we did in here was, I think I picked this one and this one, grabbed it and put it to 5% if I'm not mistaken. Let's color pick that. And then I think we did bring down the saturation a bit, but I might bring brightness down a bit as well. So again, like not really pure math, but you can take it as a starting point and then use your eyes as a designer to see if it looks and feels correct. Again, this is going to be a recorded video, so hopefully it's still going to feel noticeable, these subtle differences that I'm doing. But if not, try to actually follow along in Figma and use the correct numbers that you're going to see on the screen, and then you're going to be able to actually like compare and see how it looks and feels. And again, on my screen, it doesn't have to necessarily look good on all of the other screens in the world that are not going to be calibrated the same, and so on and so on. Okay, so what we need to do next is think about the neutral colors that we're going to use. And I am going to take the primary color as a starting point for that. And with neutrals, I usually expect at least a little bit more. So I would start things off with something like this. Just because most of the UI, as you've learned so far throughout the course, is actually a shade of gray. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to move it in here somewhere, and I'm going to try to find a gray that feels like it's at 50% brightness, that still has enough saturation so that it slowly feels like it's purplish but still not enough. So the exact science would probably be somewhere around here, and you play it around. If you want your UI to feel a little bit more tinted, you're gonna use something that's a little bit more saturated. And if you want it to feel like less neutral, like some of the examples that we had in like social media apps, where like the shade almost feels like completely gray, and you're doing it because there's gonna be a lot of content of photos where that the colors that are going to be on the photo might not work well with a tinted shade that you have. Like all of those things, keep in mind when you're deciding on like how gray or not gray you want to go. I think I'm going to go somewhere in here and like 20, 12, 13. Yeah, I think those are going to be good. I'm just going to lower the saturation to the exact 50. And that's it. That's going to be our middle gray point. Now I'm going to take that one and replace the two shades that we have in here. And I'm gonna create a really dark one. So one thing with the neutral tones, you're actually going to be moving more into this kind of a curve. With saturated tones, you're doing more of this. With neutral, you're doing more of that movement. So I'm gonna be looking for a really dark one in area like this. And I am gonna make it a little bit less saturated. So something like this. That's gonna be my darkest hue. And I'm gonna create the lightest hue, which is probably gonna be like barely having any saturation. I might leave it at 2, but I'll have to actually see it on a real product to know if it's a correct one. Then for this one, I'm probably gonna grab this, make it slightly darker like this. Again, you don't want to overdo saturation. It needs to feel like it's there, but not as much as you would maybe expect. And then for this one, as you're going lighter and lighter, really removing saturation. So I might do something like this. And then in between those two, I'm just going to create a shade by using this other approach that's not like just nitpicking something. And eyeballing it, it's going to be more like this. Okay, perfect. And then this is going to do the same thing. So, yeah. And when I'm thinking about all of the shades that we're creating, I'm trying to assign, sorry about this, doesn't seem like it's the correct one. It might be. I'm trying to assign meanings to them. I'm just going to make this a little bit brighter, like this. And again, I'm now just eyeballing it. I'm going to actually use those colors in context and then see like which ones need tweaking. But this one is going to be like the boldest, most important text. This one is a little bit of that lighter text. This one is the text that still needs to pass accessibility standards, but it's really going to be like tertiary on the screen when it comes to hierarchy. The mid one is usually either for the same reasons, maybe like some placeholder text, maybe some icons in the interface, like all of those areas is where I would use the middle one. The lighter shade of that, not sure, maybe we're going to actually need another lighter one instead of having one that's somewhere in between. But those things are usually going to be, like these two are usually going to be used somewhere for like dividers or like maybe some icons or elements that are not actually clickable but still need to be somewhat visible. Definitely like dividers or like subtle backgrounds that we're going to have on some elements. And this one is going to be just like the lightest background that's not white. And that brings me to actually introducing white in our palette like this. So that's what, 8 shades of neutral colors. If I were to name them, this one would probably be like neutral 0, neutral 100, neutral 200 or 300. This one is neutral 400, 500, 600. This one is a little bit further, so I'm going to say like 800 and 900. So one thing that you're doing, the middle tone is usually the 500 one. This one is the darkest and 900. This one is the lightest, so it's 100. I usually kind of put in white with the neutral grays and call it like a 0. And then all of the other ones, you're going to basically grade on how light or dark they feel compared to the middle tone. So these two are close, so I'm going to put this one as 400, but these two are not close, so I'm going to keep it closer to this one and call it 200. Therefore, in this palette, we're only missing a 300 and a 700 one in between the 600 and 800. Not like really something that you need to follow and do the same thing with, but I'm trying to kind of explain my logic behind how to name things and document them, and also how to organize your color system so that you actually assign meanings to things. So again, this one would be primary 500, 600, and maybe 900, primary 100 and 200. And that's it. Like all of the other ones I'm going to introduce if needed. And in the worst case scenario, if you're actually going to be introducing a shade in between these two, you can either talk with your developers and kind of rename all of the 200 ones into 300 ones, so you kind of have space for the one in between, or you can just call it like 150. No one's gonna like be dragging you down for introducing a style in between the two, if it's really needed. And if there's a clear use case for it, that's going to be beneficial for everyone if it's brought into the project. And besides that, you're also going to have to create things like semantic colors. So maybe like a red or a green one that's going to work really well for this project. So you could also create like a yellow one or a blue one for info sections or something. But overall, like the starting point for your project should be to have a couple of shades for the primary, secondary, if you need it. It's really optional. A lot of projects don't, especially like mobile app ones, web app ones. Neutral tones for like all the text and backgrounds and everything. And then the semantic colors for things that you're going to be using to convey statuses and messages to your users. For those, I usually maybe won't even have to have 5. You could have just like 1 or 2 lighter colors and 1 darker color. So start off with something that feel like it's going to fit with how much you're going to need it for your project. And then like introduce, if you need more, introduce more. So if we're moving to like bringing in a red shade, one thing that you can do is try to like use like plus 30 or minus 30 until you get to the correct hue. Why? Because usually we divide our color wheel with like 30-degree marks or 15-degree marks. So that's something that I found out works for me. So if I think about this, 290 plus 60, it's divisible by 30, would be a shade that might actually work well with these colors. Now it does feel a little bit lighter, so if I just bring it down a little bit, it's gonna feel like it's working better with the context of this project, and actually feels a little bit more red. So I like both of those reasons, and I would use it in here. You could create a darker one for text. I'm trying to make it feel like it's gonna be consistent with this, and also the lighter one, again, trying to make it feel like it's gonna work with somewhere in between these two colors, or maybe the lighter one. So something like this. And now we have a couple of these colors. I'm not going to do the same thing for green. If you want to, as a practice, like try to create it for this palette that we're doing, I'm just going to move on to a screen like this and just kind of grab it into our project and see if it works. So what we would do, you have this selection area part of the screen that you can use. I'm going to grab the lightest shade in here, and I'm going to color pick it and turn it into this one. Again, a really subtle difference. Not sure if actually like anything visibly changed. I'm going to grab the darker ones and use this. I can then maybe use a shade like this one for some of these labels. Still works really well. And let's see where we need to introduce our primary color maybe. So I'd say probably we're gonna need this. All these areas being colored. Okay, awesome. And maybe we can also make this action or whatever it is colored. We can maybe use these chevrons. They're not actually interactive as one of the lighter grays that we have available. So just slowly color picking and kind of adjusting this. I think I picked the wrong one, so I'm just going to replace it. And you already have something that has a little bit of branding in here. Again, this one is set to luminosity, so I'm going to send it to pass through. And this app already feels like it's working a little bit better. I'm just going to change the background of this section to white, so it's a little bit easier to notice. But yeah, you can already see this kind of taking shape when it comes to color. One thing that we are going to notice is this part and this area might, if they're filled, might feel different. So I'm just going to use for icons, look for, okay, so it's set to fill, look for home, grab this. I think I set it to 24, replace it. And now if I actually use this purple, it would feel a bit bolder than all of the other areas. So one way that you can solve for it is by using opacity and maybe setting it to like 90 or 80, so that it works better for your project, because now these two actually look closer to each other than these two. This one feels more dominant and this one feels lighter. Our eyes are a weird thing to kind of plan around, because we perceive things very differently than what you would expect. So one thing that you can also introduce into your color palette is opacities. So one thing that I would usually do is have the main color, so like the 500s, set to like 80%, 50%, 20%, 10% or something, and then kind of use those opacities where they're needed. Or you can just have a rule for yourself that anytime when you're going to use opacity, it's going to be like 25, 50, 75% or 100%. Just like something that's going to work and that's going to keep things consistent is a good thing to kind of put as a limitation on yourself when you're designing. And again, like if you're working in a team, if you're working with developers, make sure that everyone understands that those are the numbers and how they're used and why. And you can do the same thing for all of the other shades that you're going to be using as well. I do like to do it for the darkest neutral shade that I have and for whites, because in a lot of areas I do want to use white at like 80% if it's on a color background, because that color is going to give me a subtle hue. And by using opacity of 80%, I'm actually getting that effect without creating a new hex shade of color that I now need to document and kind of understand that it's only going to be used for description text on a colored background for the secondary colors. And it's kind of slowly becoming too hard to manage. So if there's a better way to do it, like the one that I explained, or maybe like something else that works for you, do it that way. But just make sure that everyone on the team understand that you're doing that and why you're doing that. And another thing that we could do is maybe like turn one of these ones into a promoted action. And since it's going to be promoted, I'm actually going to use the secondary one in here. White, we do have white in here. I would check if this is actually passing accessibility standards. If not, maybe this is going to be the way to go. Again, not black, but like maybe this neutral shade. To me, this does feel okay, but feeling, and to me it doesn't matter in design. It's more important to see if it's actually going to be usable by our users. So just something to keep in mind. And in here we do have a shadow, but I do want to make it maybe a pink one. And since it is not black, which is the most contrast that you can have, you can increase it and make it feel more consistent with the other shadows by actually increasing the opacity in here into something. Okay, yeah, so you can actually see like this palette working. Again, one screen is not going to be enough. It's best to try it out on different potential components, or like have a screen or 2 or 3 ready before you actually start to kind of marry the idea of this palette that you created and kind of turn them into systemized components and styles that you're going to use. And to do that, we already learned you're going to hit this style in here, you're going to go in here, you're going to name it like mobile app project, because unfortunately in the file that I'm working, all of the other elements are in here, so I just want to kind of have the differentiation in here. For you, it's probably just going to be primary /500, and that's going to create a primary folder for you, and all of the other ones you can also create. So one thing that sometimes happens when you're creating shades, especially if you introduce a new one, primary 900, is that it is going to kind of reorder. So you can just kind of drag them around and make them work for you, like either go from the lowest to the darkest points, or from the darkest to the lowest, whatever makes more sense for you. And you can organize it into folders like this. So yeah, I'm just gonna delete this for now once I've demoed it. Okay, perfect. So we did this for one type of project. I am again gonna split this video into 2 parts just because it's getting long, and I do want to keep the quality of the video versus having to kind of condense it and just to kind of keep it working with the size limits that we have on the platform. All in all, see you in the next video.